The moment my parents signed the rental agreement, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel proud either. What I felt was something colder, quieter, and much heavier than revenge. It felt like closure. The address on the lease was the same house where we grew up, the same house where I was once told very clearly that it would never belong to me, that it was meant to be my sister's future base. Now, that same address sat neatly typed under the tenant section, and my name was printed under owner. I watched as the security deposit hit my bank account, transferred by the same parents who once told me they couldn't spare a dollar for my education. And the sister who supposedly couldn't survive without a college fund was now living under a roof I owned. That was the moment I realized that life doesn't forget anything. It just waits. They used to say one sentence over and over, like it was common sense and not a choice. They said my sister needed the college fund more. She partied, I worked. And now the lease proves who really paid for the future. This story didn't begin with me buying a house. It began much earlier, the day I was quietly labeled the strong one. Being strong in my family never meant being admired. It meant being convenient. It meant needing less, asking for nothing, and being expected to figure things out on my own. From childhood, I understood that my value came from how little I required. My sister, on the other hand, was always described as delicate, sensitive, and in constant need of protection. That single difference shaped everything. She got the best clothes because confidence was important for her. I learned to be grateful for whatever was left. Her birthdays were events, carefully planned with decorations, guests, and gifts. Mine were simple meals and reminders that we shouldn't waste money. When she got a new phone, it was about safety and peace of mind. When my phone stopped working properly, I was reminded that I didn't really need much anyway. The message was always subtle but consistent. She needed investment, I needed adjustment. School only reinforced this dynamic. When her grades barely passed, the house filled with reassurance about effort and pressure and how hard things were for her. When I brought home top grades, medals, and distinctions, the reaction was muted. Approval came with conditions. I was praised only if I stayed humble, quiet, and grateful. Excellence was expected from me, not celebrated. I learned early that success was not something I would be rewarded for. It was something I was required to deliver. Whenever questions came up about fairness, the explanation was always the same. She was sensitive, she had anxiety, she needed more support. I was told I was strong, smart, capable, and independent. At first, I wore those words like a badge of honor. Over time, I realized they were just a softer way of saying I was on my own. Strength became the reason I didn't deserve help. Still, I tried to earn my place. I studied obsessively, not just to succeed, but to justify my existence. I stayed up late watching free lectures, reading borrowed books, and filling cheap notebooks with notes that felt like my only safety net. While others relaxed on weekends, I worked. I tutored, took small jobs, chased internships, and said no to anything that cost money or time. Education wasn't just about learning, it was my exit strategy. Yet, no matter how disciplined I was never the priority. Slowly, painfully, I began to understand that my family didn't see my effort as something worth supporting. They saw it as proof that they didn't need to support me at all. My independence wasn't respected, it was exploited. In their minds, there was only one real investment, and I was just the backup plan. At that time, I didn't yet know how deep that decision went. I still believed that when it truly mattered, things would balance out. I still believed that fairness would eventually show up. I was wrong, and that realization would come later, quietly, through paperwork, conversations overheard, and choices that were never meant to include me. But standing there years later, watching my parents sign a lease on a house they once controlled completely, I finally understood something that took me a lifetime to learn. Being strong doesn't protect you from being overlooked. Sometimes it makes it easier for people to forget you altogether. And sometimes the only justice that exists is the kind you build yourself, one sleepless night at a time. The moment everything truly broke wasn't dramatic from the outside. No shouting, no slammed doors, no tears on the floor. It happened quietly, sitting at the dining table, the kind of moment that doesn't look traumatic until years later when you realize it permanently rewired how you see your family. I had prepared for that conversation carefully. I came in with grades, acceptance letters, scholarship offers, cost breakdowns, and a calm plan. I wasn't asking for everything. I was asking for a bridge, a little help so I could finish school without drowning in debt. I genuinely believed that once they saw the numbers, they would finally meet me halfway. Instead, what I got was confirmation of something I had felt my entire life, but never wanted to admit out loud. They laid out their decision like it was logical, reasonable, even kind. The college fund, they explained, would mostly go to my sister, not because I didn't deserve it, but because she needed it more, because she wasn't like me, because she struggled more, because without that support she might fail completely, and because I was strong, capable, independent, and good at figuring things out on my own. The message was always subtle but consistent. She needed investment, I needed adjustment. As they talked, something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not emotional, just hollow. It finally clicked that the fund I had always heard about as for the kids was never really for both of us. It had always been allocated, planned, decided long before I ever sat at that table. I realized that no matter how well I performed, no matter how little I asked for, the outcome would have been the same. I wasn't part of the primary plan. I was the contingency. I nodded. I said I understood. I said I would manage. And in that moment, I watched their shoulders relax. My acceptance wasn't just expected, it was required. That was when I understood my role in the family clearly for the first time. I wasn't the child they invested in. I was the child they relied on to not need anything. The discovery didn't stop there. Over the next few months, things started adding up in ways I couldn't ignore. While sorting old documents one afternoon, I came across financial paperwork I had never seen before. Inside was a detailed breakdown labeled as a college fund plan. Dates, amounts, growth projections, and next to most of the entries was my sister's name, not ours, hers. There was even a note that said funds were primarily for her education, with leftover amounts potentially available for others. Others. That word stayed with me longer than it should have. Then there were the bank statements. Years of deposits clearly marked for her education, consistent, intentional, protected. I compared that with my reality at the time, juggling part-time work, hunting scholarships, calculating rent down to the dollar, choosing between textbooks and groceries. It wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was strategy. What hurt more than the documents were the conversations I overheard without meaning to. Calls with relatives where I was described as the one who will be fine. The implication was always the same. I didn't need support because I wasn't at risk of falling apart. I could be leaned on. I could be overlooked. I could be trusted to absorb pressure quietly. Somewhere along the way, my resilience had been repackaged as permission to deprioritize me. A relative once casually mentioned that my parents were smart for focusing resources where they were most needed. That line echoed in my head for weeks. Most needed. As if worth was measured by fragility. As if stability meant surplus. As if being dependable meant being optional. That's when the truth fully settled in. My hard work had never inspired them to support me. It had reassured them that they didn't have to. Every late night, every sacrifice, every responsible decision I made didn't earn me help. It excused its absence. I remember sitting alone one night, surrounded by notes, schedules, and bills, realizing that no one was coming to save me. And strangely, that realization didn't break me. It clarified me. It stripped away the last bit of hope I had been carrying that one day they would wake up and see me the way I had wanted to be seen. That hope had been costing me energy I couldn't afford anymore. So I stopped explaining. I stopped justifying. I stopped expecting fairness. I didn't confront them because there was nothing left to negotiate. The decision had been made years ago. All that was left was how I would respond to it. And that was the moment my mindset shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. I accepted that if I was going to build a future, it would be without emotional or financial backup. And instead of fighting that reality, I decided to weaponize it. If my strength was going to be used as a reason to deny me support, then I would use that same strength to build something no one could take from me. I didn't announce this change. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't burn bridges. On the surface, I remained the same responsible, understanding child they had always known. But internally, I stopped seeing my family as a safety net. I started seeing them as background noise. My focus shifted completely inward towards survival, strategy, and long-term independence. That was the real beginning. Not the house, not the contract, not the rent checks. The beginning was the moment I realized that fairness wasn't coming, and waiting for it was a luxury I couldn't afford. After everything became clear, I did not explode. I did not confront them. I did not cry in front of anyone or demand fairness. Instead, I did what I had been trained to do my whole life. I adapted. I nodded, said I understood, and played the role of the reasonable, low-maintenance child who never makes things difficult. On the surface, I accepted their decision about the college fund. Inside, something very important shifted. I stopped expecting them to ever show up for me. And that realization was strangely freeing. From that point on, every move I made was intentional. I stopped seeing my life as something that needed their approval. I started treating it like a long-term project where the only guarantee would come from my own discipline. I hunted for scholarships like my survival depended on it, because in many ways it did. Merit aid, need-based grants, obscure programs most people never bothered applying for, I applied to all of them. I chose an affordable path, even when it meant swallowing my pride and taking routes that were not flashy. Community college credits, transfers, programs that offered the highest return with the lowest debt. I stopped chasing the image of success and focused purely on sustainability. While my sister was living the private university lifestyle that the college fund bought her, I was learning how to stretch every dollar. Shared apartments, roommates I barely knew, secondhand furniture, meals that were more about calories than enjoyment. I worked nights, weekends, holidays, whenever someone else wanted time off. Tutoring, freelancing, side jobs that paid little individually but added up through consistency. There were days when exhaustion felt permanent, when it seemed unfair that I had to work twice as hard just to stand still. But every paycheck, every saved dollar, felt like proof that I was building something no one could take from me. The contrast between us only grew with time. My sister's college years were loud and expensive. Parties, trips, extensions for missed deadlines, semesters repeated, money spent fixing mistakes instead of building skills. Mine were quiet. My life became routines, spreadsheets, goals written down and revised every few months. I learned early that discipline compounds in silence. No one applauds it in the moment, but it changes your future in ways people only notice much later. After graduation, I chose a career path that rewarded consistency and long-term thinking. It was not glamorous, but it paid well if you stayed focused. I learned everything I could, volunteered for the hard projects, stayed late when others left early. While my sister struggled to transition into adult life, I quietly stabilized mine. I built an emergency fund, then savings, then investments. I learned how money actually works because no one had ever planned to teach me. I had become my own safety net. Years passed. My parents, who had poured so much into one child, began to feel the strain. Supporting my sister did not end with college. There were gaps between jobs, rent they helped cover, debts that never quite disappeared. Their own finances tightened. The house we grew up in, the one they had always spoken about as my sister's future base, became more of a burden than a legacy. Maintenance, taxes, repairs. Eventually, downsizing stopped being an idea and became a necessity. That was when I started paying attention to property listings in that neighborhood. Quietly, methodically. I ran numbers, checked market trends, spoke to agents who did not know my history. When the house finally went on the market, I did not rush. I made a clean, legal offer through proper channels. No drama, no emotional appeals, just paperwork and money I had earned myself. When the deal closed, I did not announce it. I simply updated my records and moved on with my life. The moment of payoff did not come immediately. It came later, when circumstances pushed my parents and sister into needing a place they could afford, something familiar, something that felt safe. The irony was heavy, even then. Out of all the houses available, the one they were most comfortable with was the same one they had once told me would never be mine. They saw it as a relief, a solution. I saw it as the quietest form of truth revealing itself. The day they realized I was the owner was not dramatic. There was no shouting, no raised voices, no victory speech. Just silence, confusion, and the slow understanding settling into their faces. I did not gloat. I did not explain myself in detail. Everything that mattered was already written in legal documents, in bank statements, in years of consistent effort that no one had truly acknowledged. I offered them exactly what I would offer any tenant: a fair lease, market rent, clear terms, boundaries that protected both sides. What made it powerful was not what I said, but what I did not say. I did not bring up the college fund immediately. I did not list their past decisions. I let reality speak first. I let the fact that I was calm, prepared, and in control do the talking. This was not revenge fueled by anger. It was accountability delivered through structure, through contracts, through the very system they once believed I would never navigate without them. Watching them sign those papers was not satisfying in the way movies make revenge look satisfying. It was quieter than that, heavier, because in that moment, everyone involved understood something without needing it explained. They had invested everything in one child because they thought she was the only one who needed it. They had underestimated what the other child could build when left alone. And now, the roles were no longer theoretical. They were measurable, monthly, enforced. That was the moment I realized the most powerful form of payback is not humiliation, it is independence. It is becoming so self-sufficient that the people who once dismissed you are forced to meet you on equal, professional terms. Not as family favorites, not as burdens, just as adults living with the consequences of their choices. Seeing my parents standing there, realizing that the house they were hoping would save them was owned by the child they once dismissed, didn't bring me the rush people imagine revenge gives you. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, heavy, the kind of silence that forces people to finally sit with the consequences of choices they've spent years justifying. My sister couldn't even look at me properly. Her confidence, the same confidence that had been funded for years, suddenly felt brittle. My parents tried to regain control of the situation by talking logistics, rent timelines, paperwork, anything that would let them avoid the emotional reality unfolding right in front of them. But there was no escaping it. The dynamic had shifted permanently. I explained everything calmly, not because I wanted to appear superior, but because I had already processed my anger years ago. I told them that the lease was standard, the rent was market rate, and the expectations were the same as they would be for any tenant. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't mock them. I didn't need to. Reality was doing the work for me. Every sentence I spoke landed heavier because it was backed by contracts, ownership documents, and years of quiet discipline they had never truly acknowledged. That was when the guilt started to surface. My parents began reframing the past, doing what they had always done best, softening their own accountability. They spoke about doing what they thought was best at the time, about limited resources, about how they always believed I would land on my feet. They pointed out that I had scholarships, that I had managed, that things had turned out fine for me. But that was the part they still didn't understand. I hadn't succeeded because of their decisions. I had succeeded in spite of them. My sister, on the other hand, reacted differently. There was a mix of embarrassment and resentment in her expression, as if she couldn't decide whether to feel ashamed or attacked. To her, this situation felt like punishment, like I had orchestrated all of this just to humiliate her. But that wasn't the truth. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I wasn't interested in payback through suffering. What I wanted, and what this moment represented, was balance, accountability, a clear demonstration that effort compounds and entitlement eventually collapses when it's no longer being subsidized. I reminded them, calmly, that for years I had been told to be strong, to manage, to figure things out on my own. I did exactly that. I invested in myself when no one else would. I funded my education with work, not excuses. I built my career with consistency, not shortcuts. I lived below my means while others lived above theirs on borrowed security. The only difference now was that my strength had produced something tangible, something legal, something undeniable. A house, their house. I set boundaries clearly, because boundaries were something no one had ever modeled for me growing up. Family, I explained, doesn't mean unlimited access to someone else's labor or resources. Love doesn't cancel out contracts. Respect doesn't require self-sacrifice without limits. If they wanted to live there, they would follow the lease. If they couldn't, they were free to find something else. There were no threats in my tone, no emotional manipulation, just facts. That moment changed our relationship permanently, not because I became cruel, but because I stopped being convenient. I was no longer the backup plan, the emotional insurance policy, the child expected to absorb discomfort so others could remain comfortable. I had stepped into a role they never imagined for me, and it forced them to reevaluate the story they had been telling themselves for years. The story where favoritism was disguised as necessity, where my independence was treated as proof that I didn't need support. Over time, the dynamic settled into something quieter. My parents adjusted, slowly, awkwardly, learning what it meant to interact with me as an equal instead of an afterthought. My sisters struggled more. Without constant financial cushioning, her choices finally had consequences. And for the first time, she had to sit with the reality that effort matters, that opportunity wasted doesn't magically regenerate just because someone believes they deserve more chances. Looking back, I realized the deepest betrayal wasn't the college fund itself, it was the logic behind it. The idea that because I was capable, I was expendable, that my resilience made me less worthy of investment, that strength meant silence. It took me years to unlearn that lie. Strength doesn't mean you deserve less. It means you can survive less, but you shouldn't have to. If you're listening to this and you spent your life being the strong one, the reliable one, the child or sibling everyone leans on but no one lifts up, understand this. Your discipline is not a free resource. Your resilience is not an excuse for neglect. And your future belongs to you, not to the people who assumed you would be fine no matter what they took from you. Sometimes family isn't defined by blood or shared history. Sometimes it's defined by who takes you seriously, by who sees your effort as something worth supporting instead of something to exploit. For me, that realization didn't come with an apology. It came with keys, deeds, and a signed lease that reflected the truth better than words ever could. They used the college fund to buy her parties and temporary comfort. I used my sleepless nights to buy a future. And now, every month when the rent clears, it quietly reminds everyone involved whose investment actually paid off.